Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. The loading dock wasn't empty. I'm standing in the freezing rain watching the warehouse door seal shut behind me for the last time, and all I can think about is the sound of breathing. Not my breathing, someone else's. Someone who was always exactly 17 feet behind me, hidden in the shadows between the industrial shelving units, matching my footsteps for 3 straight weeks. I took the warehouse night shift at Dalton Distribution Center because the pay was genuinely good and I desperately needed the quiet. After 2 years of retail hell with screaming customers and incompetent managers, the idea of working alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., just me and thousands of boxes in a cavernous building, sounded like paradise. The job was simple enough: scan inventory, restock shelves, prepare orders for morning pickup, and do a perimeter check every 2 hours. The building was massive, about 200,000 square feet of concrete floors and metal shelving that stretched up 20 feet high, creating corridors of products that seemed to go on forever. My supervisor, a tired-looking guy named Greg, gave me the walkthrough on my first night. He showed me the break room, the bathroom, the office where I'd do my computer work, and the loading dock. The loading dock was at the east end of the building, a huge space with 4 roll-up doors where trucks would back in during the day. At night, all 4 doors were supposed to be sealed tight, locked from the inside with a heavy deadbolt and monitored by sensors that would trigger an alarm if they were opened. For the first 3 weeks, everything was exactly as routine as I'd hoped. I'd arrive at 10:45, clock in, and Greg would give me a quick rundown of anything unusual from the day shift before heading home. Then I'd be alone. The building had that particular kind of silence that only exists in huge empty spaces, broken occasionally by the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant clang of the HVAC system kicking on, or my own footsteps echoing off the concrete. I'd put in my earbuds, listen to podcasts, and work through my tasks in a comfortable rhythm. The loading dock was part of my perimeter check. I'd walk through the main warehouse floor past aisles labeled A through Z, then through the connector hallway to the loading dock area. I'd test each door to make sure it was secure, check that the deadbolts were engaged, and mark it off on my tablet. The whole circuit took about 15 minutes, and I'd do it at midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and 6 a.m. It was during my 4th week that I started noticing something off. I'd do my midnight check, confirm all 4 loading dock doors were closed and locked, then head back to the main floor to continue inventory work. But when I'd return for my 2 a.m. check, door 3 would be open. Not wide open, just cracked up about 2 feet, enough that I could see the parking lot lights outside and feel cold air seeping in. The first time it happened, I assumed I'd made a mistake during my last check, maybe didn't pull it down all the way. I closed it firmly, heard the deadbolt catch, and made a mental note to be more careful. But it happened again 2 nights later. Same door, closed at midnight, open at 2 a.m. This time I took a photo with my phone showing the timestamp and sent it to Greg, asking if there was a mechanical issue with that door. He wrote back the next evening saying maintenance had looked at it and found nothing wrong, but the sensor was acting up and they'd replace it next week. Except sensors don't explain what I started noticing after that. When I'd approached the loading dock for my checks, I began seeing wet footprints on the concrete floor leading from door 3 into the warehouse. Not a lot of them, just a few prints like someone had walked through a puddle outside and tracked water in. The prints were large, definitely made by boots, and they were always fresh, the water not yet evaporated. I'd follow them with my flashlight, my heart starting to pound, and they'd lead down one of the aisles past shelving units loaded with boxes of merchandise. But they'd always disappear about halfway down the aisle. Just stop existing like whoever made them had simply evaporated. No puddle where someone stood, no prints leading anywhere else. just a trail that ended in the middle of the floor. I convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe condensation from the HVAC system dripping onto the floor in a pattern that looked like footprints. Maybe I was seeing things because I was tired, working overnight hours messing with my perception. I didn't report it to Greg because I didn't want to sound paranoid during my first month. But then the breathing started. It was during my 5th week around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was working in aisle M scanning boxes of kitchen appliances onto my tablet when I heard it. A soft rhythmic sound. Breathing, not loud, not threatening, just the natural sound of someone inhaling and exhaling. I froze, my own breath catching in my throat. The sound was coming from the other side of the shelving unit from aisle N, running parallel to where I stood. I stood completely still and listened. The breathing continued, steady and calm. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice echoed through the massive space and died away. The breathing stopped. I waited 30 seconds, heard nothing, and convinced myself I'd imagined it. I went back to scanning boxes, trying to ignore the way the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I moved down the aisle, scanning the next section of inventory. After about 2 minutes, I heard it again. Breathing. Same rhythm. Same volume. Still coming from aisle N, but now from a position that corresponded to where I currently stood. I took 5 quick steps forward and stopped. The breathing stopped. I stood still and it resumed. I moved again and it matched me, staying exactly parallel to my position on the other side of the shelving unit. My hands were shaking as I walked to the end of the aisle and rounded the corner to look down aisle N. It was empty, just shelves and boxes and shadows and fluorescent lights humming overhead. I walked down the entire length of it, checking every section, and found nothing. No one hiding, no equipment that could make that sound, nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was air moving through the ventilation system, creating a sound that my tired brain interpreted as breathing. Maybe the building settled in ways that produced weird acoustic effects. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next night, I came in determined to figure out what was happening. I did my midnight perimeter check and found door 3 open again. Wet footprints leading into the warehouse, disappearing halfway down aisle F. I took photos of everything. Then I went back to my inventory work, and at 3 a.m. exactly, the breathing started again. This time I was in aisle R and the breathing was coming from aisle S. I decided to test it. I walked quickly to the end of the aisle and sprinted to aisle S, trying to catch whoever was there by surprise. Empty. I ran back to aisle R, thinking maybe they'd crossed over. Empty. But as soon as I stopped moving and stood still, the breathing resumed. On the other side of the shelving unit, matching my position perfectly. I spent the rest of that shift in the office with the door locked, doing computer work and checking security camera feeds. The cameras covered the loading dock, the main entrances, and the parking lot. But there were huge blind spots in the warehouse aisles. The footage from door 3 showed it rolling open at 2:17 a.m., seemingly by itself, no person visible. It stayed open for about 3 minutes, then rolled shut again. No one entered, no one left. The parking lot cameras showed my car, alone. I called Greg the next morning and told him everything. The door opening, the footprints, the breathing. He listened quietly and then said maintenance had replaced the door sensor yesterday, so that should be fixed. As for the rest, he asked if I was getting enough sleep, adjusting okay to the night shift. He wasn't dismissive exactly, but I could hear in his voice that he thought I was just tired and paranoid. He suggested I take an extra break during my shift, maybe walk outside for fresh air. I seriously considered quitting, but I needed the job, needed the money, and part of me felt ridiculous for being scared of breathing sounds and wet footprints. So I went back the next night telling myself I'd keep my head down, do my work, and ignore anything weird. Door 3 was closed during all my perimeter checks that night. No wet footprints. I started to relax, thinking maybe whatever had been happening had stopped. I was working in aisle D around 3 a.m. when the breathing started again, this time from aisle E. I ignored it, kept scanning boxes, tried to focus on my podcast. The breathing continued, staying parallel to me. I moved down the aisle. It moved with me. I stopped. It stopped. Then I heard something new. Footsteps. Not the echo of my own footsteps, but distinct sounds coming from aisle E. Slow, deliberate steps matching my pace when I moved, stopping when I stopped. I pulled out my earbuds and stood completely still, my heart hammering. The footsteps stopped. The breathing continued. I don't know what possessed me, but I spoke to it. "What do you want?" My voice came out shaky and weak. The breathing stopped for just a moment, then resumed. And then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard a voice. It said, "Leave." I ran. I didn't grab my coat, didn't clock out, just sprinted to my car and drove home. I called Greg from my apartment and quit over the phone, told him I had a family emergency and couldn't come back. He tried to convince me to at least work a notice period, but I refused. I never went back to pick up my final paycheck. I didn't want to set foot in that building ever again. 2 months later, I saw a news article online. A body had been found at Dalton Distribution Center, hidden in a crawl space behind the loading dock. The remains had been there for an estimated 6 months. A homeless man who'd apparently been sheltering in the building and died from exposure. The article mentioned that workers had reported strange occurrences, sounds, and doors opening in the months before the discovery. I still think about it constantly, about those wet footprints leading from the loading dock into the warehouse, stopping halfway down the aisles. About the breathing that matched my movements, always 17 feet away on the other side of the shelving units. About that voice telling me to leave. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I heard. I know I wasn't alone in that building, even though every camera showed I was. I work in a busy office now, surrounded by people during normal daylight hours, and I never ever want to work a night shift again. Story 2. My co-worker clocked out 6 months ago. The first time I saw Janet's face in the security footage, my blood turned to ice. Not because she was there, but because she wasn't. The hallway was empty, the timestamp reading 2:47 a.m. Exactly when I'd been walking that corridor, exactly when I'd been talking to her, exactly when she'd been helping me locate the portable ultrasound machine. I'd been working alongside a ghost for 6 weeks, and I hadn't known until that moment. Let me start at the beginning. I'm a night shift nurse at Riverside Medical Center, working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. rotation on the 3rd floor, which houses post-surgical recovery and long-term care patients. The night shift is always understaffed. It's just the reality of hospital work. Most nights it's me and maybe one other nurse covering 40 patients, plus a skeleton crew of techs and a single doctor on call for emergencies. It's exhausting work, but it pays better than day shift, and I'm good at managing on my own. I started at Riverside in late January, moving from a smaller hospital across the state. The orientation was quick, just 2 shadow shifts with the outgoing night nurse, a woman named Carolyn who was transferring to day shift. She showed me where everything was, how to use the computer system, which doctors were responsive and which ones you had to page 3 times. Standard stuff. She never mentioned Janet. My first solo shift was a Friday night, and I was nervous about managing everything alone. The 3rd floor is shaped like a wide H, with patient rooms along both sides of 2 long corridors connected by a central nursing station. The supply rooms, medication dispensary, and equipment storage are scattered throughout, and learning where everything was located felt overwhelming. Around 1 a.m., I was searching frantically for extra IV bags in the main supply room when I heard someone behind me say, "Second shelf on the left behind the saline boxes." I turned around and saw a woman standing in the doorway, probably in her early 50s, wearing scrubs and a tired but friendly smile. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and was holding a tablet like she'd been charting. I thanked her, found the IV bags exactly where she'd indicated, and introduced myself. She said her name was Janet, and she'd been working nights on the 3rd floor for about 8 years. I felt a rush of relief knowing I wasn't completely alone up here. We talked briefly about the patients. She gave me a few tips about which call buttons to respond to quickly and which patients just needed reassurance. And then she said she had to check on a patient in 314 and disappeared down the corridor. Over the next several weeks, I'd see Janet regularly during my shifts. Never right at the beginning and never near the end, but always during those long middle hours between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. when time seems to stretch out and the hospital is at its quietest. She'd appear when I was struggling with something, offer quick advice or help, and then drift away to another part of the floor. Our interactions were always brief and professional. She'd help me locate equipment, give me background on a difficult patient, or assist with moving someone who needed repositioning. She was soft-spoken and efficient, and I appreciated having someone experienced to lean on. The strange thing looking back was that I never saw her at the nursing station, never saw her in the break room, never ran into her during shift change. She was just there in the hallways and patient rooms when I needed help. One night in early March, I was restocking supplies in the 3rd floor storage room around 2:30 a.m. when Janet appeared in the doorway. "You're doing a good job," she said quietly. "I know it's hard being alone up here most nights, but you're handling it well." I thanked her and mentioned how helpful she'd been. She got a strange, sad look on her face and said, "I'm just trying to make up for my mistakes." Before I could ask what she meant, she walked away down the corridor. The next night, I made a point to look for Janet during my shift. I wanted to properly thank her for all her help, maybe suggest we take our breaks together since we were both working the same hours. But I didn't see her at all that night, or the next night. By the 4th night without seeing her, I started to wonder if she'd taken time off or switched to a different floor. During a quiet moment around 3 a.m., I was at the nursing station catching up on charting when Blake, one of the night techs, came by with a question about a patient. I asked him casually if he'd seen Janet around lately. He looked confused. "Janet who?" he asked. I described her. The dark-haired woman who'd been helping me out, working nights on the 3rd floor. Blake shook his head. "I've been working here for 3 years and there's no Janet on night shift. You and Carolyn are the only night nurses assigned to this floor." I felt a chill run through me. I insisted I'd been working with her for weeks, talking to her, getting help from her. Blake looked genuinely concerned and suggested maybe I was thinking of someone from day shift, or maybe someone who floated between floors. But I knew what I'd seen. I'd had full conversations with this woman. She'd known details about patients, about where supplies were kept, about the specific quirks of working this floor at night. The next evening before my shift started, I caught up with Carolyn in the parking lot and asked her about Janet. Her face went pale. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked quietly. I explained I'd been working with her, seeing her regularly during my shifts. Carolyn gripped my arm and pulled me away from the hospital entrance. "Janet Foster quit 6 months ago," she said. "There was an incident. A patient died on her watch, a post-surgical patient who had complications, and Janet didn't respond fast enough. She blamed herself, fell apart, and quit nursing entirely." "Why are you asking about her?" I told Carolyn everything. The conversations, the help Janet had given me, seeing her in the hallways and storage rooms. Carolyn listened with growing horror on her face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Janet doesn't work here anymore. She moved out of state. I heard she was in some kind of inpatient facility, dealing with severe depression and guilt." I didn't know what to say. I'd been working with this woman, or something that looked like this woman, for 6 solid weeks. Carolyn suggested gently that maybe I was overtired. Maybe I'd seen someone who resembled Janet and my exhausted brain had filled in the details. But I knew that wasn't true. This wasn't a glimpse of someone in passing. These were sustained interactions, conversations, moments of teamwork. That night I went into my shift determined to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I decided if I saw Janet again, I'd take a photo, get documentation, make her interact with another staff member so someone else could confirm she was real. The shift started normally, but I was on edge, hyper aware of every sound and movement. Around 2:30 a.m., I was checking on a patient in room 318 when I saw Janet walk past the doorway, heading toward the storage room at the end of the hall. My heart started racing. I quickly finished with the patient and followed her. She was standing in the storage room, her back to me, appearing to organize supplies on a shelf. "Janet," I said, my voice shaking slightly. She turned around and smiled. "Hey, rough night?" she asked. I stared at her, really looked at her, trying to find something that would prove she wasn't real. But she looked completely solid, completely normal. "Janet, I need to ask you something," I started. "How long have you been working at Riverside?" Her smile faded. "Why are you asking me that?" I took a breath. "Because people are telling me you quit 6 months ago, that you don't work here anymore." Her face transformed, shifting from confusion to deep sadness. "I tried to leave," she said softly, "but I can't. I'm still here. I'll always be here." "What do you mean?" I asked, fear creeping up my spine. She looked down at her hands. "Room 314, she said. "I was tired, so tired, and I didn't check on him when I should have. He was coding and I didn't hear the alarms, and by the time I got there it was too late. He died because I failed. I can't leave until I make it right." I backed toward the doorway, my mind reeling. "You're not really here," I whispered. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm trying to help," she said. "I'm trying to be the nurse I should have been. Please don't be afraid." I turned and ran down the corridor, my heart pounding. I went straight to the security office on the first floor and demanded to see the footage from the 3rd floor over the past several weeks. The guard, an older man named Dennis, was confused but pulled up the recordings when he saw how shaken I was. We watched footage from nights when I'd been working with Janet, when she'd been standing right next to me in hallways and storage rooms, when we'd been having conversations. In every single frame, I was alone. The footage showed me talking to empty air, moving equipment by myself, walking down corridors with no one beside me. There were moments where I was clearly responding to someone, nodding, thanking them, but the cameras showed no one there. Just me, alone on the 3rd floor, interacting with someone invisible. I watched myself having a full conversation in the storage room just 20 minutes earlier, talking to someone who wasn't there, backing away from empty space in fear. Dennis was staring at me with concern, asking if I was okay, if I needed to sit down. I couldn't speak. I'd been seeing her, hearing her, working with her for 6 weeks. How was that possible? I requested an immediate leave of absence and didn't go back to work for 2 weeks. I saw my doctor, described what had been happening without mentioning the ghost part, and she suggested stress and sleep deprivation could cause vivid hallucinations. She prescribed sleep medication and suggested I consider switching to day shift. But here's the thing that still haunts me. I started asking other nurses who'd worked night shift on the third floor carefully, not wanting to sound crazy. 3 other people over the course of the past 6 months since Janet quit reported seeing her. Always during night shifts, always during the quiet hours between 1 and 5 a.m. Always helpful and kind and sad. None of them had reported it because they'd convinced themselves they were overtired or mistaken. I did eventually go back to work, but I transferred to a different floor and switched to day shift. I couldn't face working nights on the 3rd floor again. Other nurses are there now, and I wonder if any of them have encountered Janet, if she's still trying to make up for her mistake by helping the nurses who struggle alone during those long overnight hours. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I don't know how to explain what happened, but I know what I saw, what I heard, and I know that the security footage showed I was always alone. Sometimes I still think about her, about that look of profound sadness on her face when she said she couldn't leave, about the fact that she died in a way, when that patient died, and some part of her couldn't move on. I pass by the 3rd floor sometimes during my shifts, and I never look down those corridors for too long, because part of me is terrified I'll see her again, still trying to help, still trying to make up for a mistake she can never fix. And another part of me wonders if I stopped being able to see her, or if she simply decided she'd helped me enough and moved on to someone else who needed her. To this day, I can't work night shifts, and I'll never forget the feeling of watching that security footage, seeing myself talking to empty air, realizing I'd been working alongside something that shouldn't exist. The hospital is full of death and grief and guilt, and I think sometimes those feelings don't leave when they're supposed to. Sometimes they put on scrubs and try to help, try to save the people they couldn't save before. Janet is still there, I'm sure of it. Still wandering the 3rd floor during the quietest hours, still trying to be the nurse she should have been, still haunted by room 314. And I hope for her sake that someday she'll forgive herself and finally be able to leave. Story 3. The gas station regular. The man is standing outside the gas station right now as I write this, just beyond the reach of the parking lot lights, and I know he's watching me even though I can't see his face. He's been coming every night for 3 weeks, always at the same time, always with the same warning. And tonight I finally understand what he was trying to tell me. I work the overnight shift at a rural gas station off Highway 49, about 20 miles from the nearest town. It's one of those middle-of-nowhere places that mostly serves truckers and people passing through on long drives. The shift runs from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and it's just me in the building. The pay is decent and the work is easy, mostly just ringing up energy drinks, coffee, cigarettes, and gas. During the slow hours between 2 and 5 a.m., I'm usually alone for stretches of an hour or more. The building is small, just a counter area with register and lottery machine, a few aisles of snacks and supplies, a coffee station, and a back storage room. Behind my counter, there's a security monitor that cycles between 4 cameras. Front parking lot, inside store, back storage room, and side lot where the dumpsters are. I mostly ignore it unless I see someone acting suspicious. The regular started showing up during my 3rd week on the job. The first time it was 2:47 a.m. exactly. I know because I glanced at the clock when the door chimed. A man walked in, probably in his 60s, wearing a brown jacket and jeans. He had a weathered face, deep lines around his eyes, and he moved slowly like his joints hurt. He walked directly to the coffee station, stood there for a moment, then turned and stared at the security monitor behind my counter. I asked if he needed help. He didn't respond, just kept staring at the monitor with this intense focus. After about 30 seconds, he walked out without buying anything. I figured he was confused or maybe had dementia, forgot where he was or what he wanted. Rural gas stations attract odd people sometimes. But then he came back the next night. Same time, 2:47 a.m. Walked in, stood by the coffee station, stared at the security monitor for about a minute, then left without a word. This time I watched him more carefully. His eyes weren't vague or confused. They were focused, intent, locked on that monitor like he was searching for something specific. The third night, same routine. Fourth night, fifth night. Every single night at 2:47 a.m., this man would come in, stand by the coffee station, stare at the security monitor, and leave. He never bought anything, never spoke, never looked at me directly. Just that intense focus on the monitor, then out the door. After a week of this, I started feeling deeply unsettled. There's something wrong about absolute consistency in human behavior. People vary, change their routines, run late or early. But this man appeared every night at exactly 2:47 a.m., like he was following a script. I mentioned it to my manager during shift change one morning, and she suggested I ban him from the store if he was making me uncomfortable. But he wasn't technically doing anything wrong, just standing and looking at a monitor. On the 10th night, I decided to engage with him. When he walked in at 2:47, I called out, "Hey, can I ask you something?" He walked to his usual spot by the coffee station and turned to look at the monitor. I came out from behind the counter and stood where I could see his face. "What are you looking at? What do you see on that monitor?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were the saddest thing I'd ever seen. Deep, profound sadness mixed with what looked like fear. "I'm trying to warn you," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. Then he raised his hand and pointed at the monitor. I turned to look at the screen. It was cycling through the 4 camera feeds on a 5-second rotation. Front lot, my car and empty parking spaces. Inside store, the aisles from an overhead angle. Side lot, dumpsters and shadows. Back storage room, shelves of inventory and supplies. Then it cycled back to inside store view. "What am I supposed to see?" I asked, turning back to him. But he was already walking toward the door. "Wait," I called out. He paused at the entrance, his hand on the door. Without turning around, he said, "Watch the back room feed. You're not alone." Then he left. I stood there feeling cold spread through my chest. I went back behind the counter and watched the monitor carefully as it cycled. Front lot, inside store, side lot, back storage room. The back room looked completely normal. Metal shelving units loaded with boxes, cases of drinks, extra supplies. Fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Nothing moving, no one there. But now I was hyper-aware of it. Every time the feed switched to the back room camera, I studied it carefully. And that's when I noticed something. In the back right corner, there was a narrow gap between 2 shelving units, just a dark space about 2 feet wide. The camera angle didn't quite reach into that gap. You could see the edges of the shelves on either side, but the space between was just darkness. I'd been in that storage room dozens of times and never thought about that gap. It was just dead space. Too narrow to store anything useful. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Could someone stand in that gap? Would the camera see them? I tried to focus on work, but my hands were shaking as I restocked cigarettes. Around 3:30 a.m., I needed to get more coffee filters from the back storage room. I stood at the door to the back room for a solid minute, my hand on the doorknob, trying to force myself to open it. Finally, I did, quickly, flipping on the lights and scanning the room. It looked exactly like it did on camera. Shelves, boxes, supplies. I grabbed the coffee filters and got out fast, locking the door behind me. For the rest of the shift, I kept watching that monitor, staring at the back room feed during its 5-second cycle, trying to see into that dark gap between the shelves. The man came back the next night at 2:47 a.m. I was ready for him this time. "What did you mean I'm not alone?" I demanded as soon as he walked in. He did his usual routine, walking to the coffee station, looking at the monitor. "The back room," he said. "Someone's hiding in the back room. I've seen them on the monitor. They wait until you're busy with customers and they come out." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? Who's hiding?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But I've been watching. I come here every night to watch. And I've seen someone in the back room when you're out here, standing in the corner, watching the camera, watching you. I felt like I was going to be sick. Why don't you call the police? Why are you just watching?" He looked at me with those sad, frightened eyes. "Because when I check the timestamp on the monitor, it doesn't match. The feed isn't live. You're watching a loop. What you see on that monitor isn't what's happening right now." I spun around and stared at the monitor. It was cycling normally. Front lot, inside store, side lot, back storage room. "What do you mean it's not live?" I asked, but when I turned back around, he was gone. I ran to the door and looked out into the parking lot. His figure was disappearing into the darkness beyond the lights, walking away into the empty fields that surrounded the gas station. I called my manager immediately, told her there was something wrong with the security system. She was annoyed at being woken up at 3 a.m. but said she'd have someone check it the next day. For the rest of my shift, I sat behind the counter with a tire iron in my lap, watching the door to the back storage room and glancing at the monitor. The security technician came the next afternoon while I was trying to sleep. My manager called to tell me he'd found a problem. Someone had tampered with the system about 3 weeks ago, installing a small device that created a 30-second loop for the backroom camera. The feed I'd been watching every night wasn't live. It was the same 30 seconds of empty storage room playing over and over while the camera itself was showing something different that I never saw. They pulled the actual archived footage from the system's backup drive. What they found made me quit that same day. For the past 3 weeks, starting around 2 a.m. every night and continuing until I left at 7 a.m., there was a person in the back storage room. A man, they thought, though his face was never visible. He would enter through the back door, which he apparently had a key for, and stand in that narrow gap between the shelving units. He would stand there for hours, completely still, just watching the door that led to the front counter area. Occasionally, he'd move slightly, shift his weight, but mostly he just stood and waited. The footage showed that several times each night when I'd gone to the storage room for supplies, I'd been within 6 feet of him. He'd press himself deeper into the shadows between the shelves, and I'd walk right past without seeing him. But the worst part was what happened on the nights when customers came in during early morning hours, around 5 or 6 a.m. The footage showed that when I was distracted with customers, occupied at the register with my back turned, he would slowly open the door from the storage room and stand in the doorway, just watching me. Several times he'd taken 3 or 4 steps into the main store area, standing in the back aisle behind the chips and candy, just observing me while I made change or rang up gas. The police identified him from the footage as someone who'd been arrested before for stalking and breaking and entering. He'd been living in a small camper on a property about 2 miles from the gas station. When they went to arrest him, they found the camper filled with photos of the gas station, of me taken through the windows, pages of handwritten notes about my schedule and routines. The man who'd been coming in at 2:47 a.m. every night was never identified. Police tried to track him down to get a statement, but no one in the area knew who he was. The footage showed him coming and going, but his car had no license plates visible, and he always paid in cash for the small amounts of gas he bought. He stopped appearing after the night he warned me about the monitor. I think about him often, about how he kept coming back night after night, trying to warn me in his strange, cryptic way, about how he said he'd been watching, trying to protect me from someone I didn't know was there. About those sad, frightened eyes and the way he pointed at the monitor, knowing it was showing me a lie. I got a new job working at a 24-hour diner in town, surrounded by other people, cameras that actually work and locks that haven't been compromised. I'll never work overnight alone again, and sometimes when it's very late and very quiet, I think about that man standing in the darkness beyond the parking lot lights, watching over me, trying to keep me safe from a threat I couldn't see. I still don't know who he was or why he helped me, but I know that for 3 weeks I was being stalked by someone who'd made a careful plan to hurt me, who'd watched me night after night, learning my patterns, waiting for his moment. And I know that a stranger I never properly thanked probably saved my life by coming to that gas station every night at 2:47 a.m. and staring at a monitor, trying to show me that what I was seeing wasn't real. The man who was hiding in my storage room is in jail now, awaiting trial. I was told he had detailed plans in his camper, notes about the best time to attack me, sketches of the building layout, a list of items he'd bring. I would have been another true crime story, another unsolved disappearance from a rural gas station on an empty highway. Instead, I'm here, alive, looking over my shoulder, checking every security camera I encounter to make sure it's actually showing live footage, and wondering about the man with the sad eyes who came every night to warn me, who watched over me from the darkness, who disappeared as soon as I was safe. I hope, wherever he is, he knows I understood his warning in time. I hope he knows he saved me. Story 4, Room 1017 never checks out. I'm holding the guest ledger from 1987 in my hands right now. The page is brittle and yellow, and I can still see my name written over and over in handwriting that isn't mine, filling every line on page 47, the same page that corresponds to October 17th. The date I was born. The date someone died in room 1017. The date that never ends in that hotel. I worked as the night auditor at the Grandview Hotel in downtown Portland for 7 months before I understood what was happening. The Grandview is one of those old establishments that opened in the 1920s, all Art Deco fixtures and marble floors in the lobby, with 10 floors of rooms that have been renovated repeatedly over the decades while maintaining that vintage charm tourists love. My job was simple: cover the front desk from midnight to 8 a.m., check in any late arrivals, handle guest complaints, run the end-of-day reports, and basically keep things running during the quiet hours. The hotel had maybe 60% occupancy on average, more on weekends, less during the week. The night shift was generally easy, lonely but peaceful. I'd check people in, answer the occasional phone call, deal with the rare noise complaint, and spend most of my time reading or watching videos on my laptop during the dead hours between 2 and 6 a.m. Room 1017 first appeared in my system during my second week. I was running through the occupancy report around 1 a.m. when I noticed it was marked as occupied, but there was no guest name attached, no check-in time, no payment method on file. I figured it was a glitch in the software, something that hadn't cleared properly from a previous stay. I made a note to mention it to the day manager and forgot about it. The next night, same thing. Room 1017 showing as occupied in the system, but no guest information. This time I walked up to the 10th floor to physically check on the room. I knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. No response. I used my master key to open it, calling out a greeting as I pushed the door open. The room was dark, empty, perfectly made up like housekeeping had just finished. I checked the bathroom, looked in the closet, found nothing. The room was unoccupied and ready for guests. I went back downstairs and manually changed the room status to vacant in the system. Problem solved, I thought. But the next night it was marked as occupied again. And the night after that, every single night when I came in at midnight, room 1017 would be showing as occupied despite being empty. I reported it to the day manager, a woman named Patricia who'd worked at the Grandview for 20 years. She looked at the system, frowned, and said she'd have IT take a look at it. A week later, IT said they couldn't find any problem with the software. Room 1017 was functioning normally in the system, they said. If it was showing as occupied, something was triggering that status change, but nothing was triggering it. The room was empty. I checked it repeatedly, different nights, different times. Always empty, always perfectly clean, always freezing cold even though the thermostat was set to 72 degrees. After a while, I just started manually marking it vacant every night and stopped worrying about it. Then the noise complaints started. 3 weeks into my job, I got a call at 2:37 a.m. from room 1016, directly next door to 1017. The guest was angry, saying someone in the adjacent room was moving furniture, dragging something heavy across the floor repeatedly, and it had been going on for 20 minutes. I apologized and said I'd handle it immediately. I went up to the 10th floor and stood in the hallway outside room 1017. I couldn't hear anything. Complete silence. I knocked firmly on the door, announced hotel security. Nothing. I unlocked the door and went inside. The room was empty and still, everything in place, no signs of any disturbance. The television was off. The lights were off. The temperature was glacial, my breath visible in the air. I checked with room 1016, apologized for the noise, and assured them it wouldn't continue. The guest was skeptical, insisting they'd heard it clearly. Furniture scraping across hardwood floors for 20 solid minutes. I offered to move them to a different room, but they declined, saying it had stopped. 2 nights later, room 1018 on the other side of 1017 called with a similar complaint. This time it was the television playing at full volume, so loud it was shaking the wall. I went up immediately. Standing in the hallway outside 1017, I heard nothing. Not a sound. I went inside. The room was dark, silent, and freezing. The television was off, unplugged from the wall. This started happening regularly. Every few nights, the rooms adjacent to or across from 1017 would call with noise complaints. Sometimes furniture moving, sometimes the television, sometimes voices arguing, sometimes the sound of someone pacing for hours. Every single time I investigated, room 1017 was silent, empty, and cold. I started offering room changes proactively to anyone booked near that room, making up excuses about plumbing work or AC repairs. About 3 months into my job, something changed. I was at the front desk around 3 a.m. working on the night audit reports when I heard the elevator ding. I looked up and watched the floor indicator above the elevator doors. It was going up. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It stopped at the 10th floor. I waited for it to come back down, figuring a guest had called it. After 5 minutes, it hadn't moved. I checked my computer. No one was checked in on the 10th floor that night except room 1009, and they'd arrived at 6 p.m. and hadn't left their room according to the keycard logs. I took the stairs up to the 10th floor and stepped into the hallway. The elevator doors were closed. I pressed the call button and they opened immediately, revealing an empty elevator. I was about to head back downstairs when I noticed the door to room 1017 was open, just slightly, maybe an inch, light spilling out into the hallway. My heart started pounding. I'd been up here just 2 hours ago to check something in the supply closet, and that door had been firmly closed. I approached slowly, calling out, "Hotel security, is anyone in there?" No response. I pushed the door open wider and looked inside. The room lights were on, all of them. The television was on, displaying only static, the volume low but audible. And on the bed was a book, a large hardcover ledger, open and lying face up like someone had just been reading it. I stepped into the room, my hands trembling, and looked at the book. It was a guest ledger, the old-fashioned kind hotels used before computers, with columns for guest name, room number, check-in date, and payment information. The leather cover was worn and cracked, and when I checked the dates on the pages, I realized it was from 1987. The page it was open to was October 17th, 1987, and every single line on that page in the guest name column was filled with the same name written over and over in shaky, desperate handwriting. My name. My full legal name. 30 lines of my name written decades before I was born. I grabbed the ledger and ran out of that room, my breath coming in short gasps. I took the stairs down, burst into the back office, and locked myself in. For the rest of my shift, I sat there staring at that ledger, at my name repeated endlessly on a page from October 17th, 1987, the date I was born. The next morning, I showed the ledger to Patricia. Her face went white. She took the book from my hands and stared at the page. "Where did you find this?" she asked quietly. I told her about room 1017, about finding it on the bed. She was silent for a long moment, then closed the ledger and put it in her desk drawer. "We don't talk about room 1017, she finally said. "It has a history. Something happened there in 1987, and we've never been able to rent it consistently since then. Guests complain. Strange things happen. Most people check out early. We've had it blessed, renovated it completely, even had paranormal investigators come through. Nothing changes." I asked what happened in 1987. Patricia hesitated, then told me a guest had died in that room on October 17th. A woman in her 30s, apparent suicide, found by housekeeping the next morning. The strange part was that she'd checked in under a false name, paid cash, and had been carrying fake identification. They never discovered her real identity. She was buried in a pauper's grave as Jane Doe, and the case was eventually closed. "What does that have to do with my name being in the ledger?" I asked. Patricia shook her head. "I don't know. But this isn't the first time strange things have happened with that room. Other employees have reported similar experiences. Finding objects that shouldn't be there, seeing things, hearing things. The room is wrong, and it's been wrong for 38 years. I should have quit right then, but I needed the job, and I convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking and written my own name in the ledger without remembering. Maybe the stress of night shift work was causing hallucinations. But I couldn't explain what happened 2 weeks later. It was a quiet Tuesday night. Maybe 4 rooms occupied in the entire hotel. Around 2 a.m., I decided to do a walkthrough of the upper floors. Just routine checking that all the hallway doors were locked and everything looked secure. When I reached the 10th floor and stepped out of the elevator, every single door in the hallway was open. Every door. All 30 rooms standing wide open, lights on inside. I froze in the hallway, fear washing over me in waves. I could see into the rooms from where I stood. They were all empty, all perfectly made up, all exactly the same except for minor decor differences. And at the end of the hallway, room 1017's door was open, and I could see the television playing static inside. I called the police. I was certain someone had broken in, that this was some kind of security breach. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes and searched the entire 10th floor with me. Every room was empty, no signs of forced entry, no damage, nothing disturbed. The officers checked the stairwells and elevator, reviewed the door key logs with me. No one had accessed the 10th floor except me in the past 6 hours. But all those doors had been closed when I'd done my rounds at midnight. I knew they had been. The officers suggested perhaps I'd forgotten, or perhaps there was a malfunction with the electronic locks. They filed a report and left. I spent the rest of the night in the back office with the door locked, refusing to go back up to the 10th floor. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the next day. Patricia wasn't surprised. She told me the average tenure for night auditors at the Grandview was about 6 months. Most people quit because of room 1017, because of the things that happen on the 10th floor during the night shift. They'd gone through 8 night auditors in the past 4 years. During my final week, I made the mistake of going back into room 1017 one more time. I wanted to understand, needed to know what was happening in that room. I went up at 4 a.m., unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room was freezing as always, so cold I could see my breath in thick clouds. I stood in the center of the room and said out loud, "What do you want? Why are you here?" The television turned on, no one touching it, displaying that gray static. The lights began to flicker, and then I heard breathing, soft and ragged, coming from the bathroom. I turned slowly and saw the bathroom door, which had been open, was now closed. The breathing continued, a sound of someone struggling, crying softly. I should have left, but I walked to that bathroom door and put my hand on the knob. It was ice cold, painful to touch. I turned it and pushed the door open. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror was covered in condensation like someone had just taken a hot shower. And written in the condensation, in letters that dripped down the mirror like water, were the words, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," repeated over and over until they filled the entire mirror. I backed out of that room and never went inside again. I finished my final week by marking room 1017 as out of order every night, refusing to go near the 10th floor unless absolutely necessary. On my last shift, as I was packing up my belongings from the desk, I found the old guest ledger in the back of the drawer where Patricia had put it. I opened it to October 17, 1987. The page had changed. My name was no longer written there. Instead, every line was filled with the same phrase. In that same shaking handwriting, "Don't work here, don't work here, don't work here," over and over, 30 times, like a desperate warning that had come 38 years too late for the woman who died there, but just in time for me. I don't know what happened in room 1017 on October 17, 1987. I don't know who that woman really was, or why she died, or why her presence remains in that hotel room, growing stronger and more desperate with each passing year. But I know she was trying to warn me, trying to communicate something through the static and the cold and the impossible events that happened during those night shifts. The Grandview Hotel is still operating. They still have a night auditor working the front desk from midnight to 8 a.m. And room 1017 is still marked in the system as occupied every single night, even though it's always empty, even though it will never truly be empty again. I work at a small motel now, a modern chain property that was built 10 years ago with no history and no ghosts. I never work above the 3rd floor, and I never take shifts that involve being alone in a building after midnight. And I threw away that guest ledger from 1987, burned it in my fireplace, because I couldn't stand seeing those desperate warnings written in the handwriting of a woman who died decades ago in a room that refuses to let her leave. Sometimes I still think about her, alone in that freezing room, trying year after year to warn people away. Trying to make noise and move furniture and turn on televisions, trying to make someone understand that room 1017 is wrong, that something terrible happened there, that the dead don't always rest peacefully in unmarked graves. To this day, I can't see the number 1017 without feeling cold. Story 5. The Parking Garage Attendant. I saw the silver sedan again last night, parked in its usual spot on level P4, engine running, brake lights glowing in the darkness. I stood at my station and watched the camera feed for 17 minutes, timing it like I've done every night for the past 2 months. At exactly 17 minutes, the car drove away, taillights disappearing up the ramp toward the exit. And when I pulled up the saved footage and zoomed in on the driver's seat, it was empty. Just like always. The car drives itself, and it's been coming for over 3 years. Let me explain from the beginning. I work as the overnight parking garage attendant for the Riverside Tower, a 20-story office building downtown with a 6-level underground parking structure. The job is simple. I sit in a small booth near the entrance on level P1, monitor the security cameras, help anyone with issues, and make sure the automated payment system is working. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the garage is mostly empty except for the cars belonging to people working late or staying in the extended stay hotel on floors 18 through 20. Level P4 is the deepest level most people use. P5 and P6 exist, but they're reserved for building management and long-term parkers who pay premium rates. P4 is dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent tubes that maintenance never seems to fix. And it's far enough down that cell service cuts out completely. Most people avoid parking there if they can, preferring the upper levels that feel less isolated. I started noticing the silver sedan during my second week on the job. It was a Honda Accord, maybe 10 years old, unremarkable except for how consistently it appeared. Every single night between 2:45 and 2:50 a.m. it would drive down the entrance ramp and park in space P427, always the same spot in the back corner farthest from the elevator. The driver never got out. The engine would keep running, brake lights on, for exactly 17 minutes. Then the car would drive back up the ramp and exit the garage. At first, I assumed it was someone on a phone call or taking a break from driving. Maybe a night shift worker who liked to decompress before going home, or someone dealing with insomnia who drove around aimlessly. It didn't seem like my business to interfere. The car wasn't causing problems, wasn't blocking anyone, just parking briefly and leaving. But after 2 weeks of watching this happen every single night with precise timing, I started feeling unsettled. There's something wrong about absolute consistency. People aren't machines. They don't arrive at exactly 2:47 a.m. every night, park in exactly the same spot, and leave after exactly 17 minutes. Humans vary. We get caught in traffic, we stay an extra minute, we park in different spaces. I started watching the camera feed more carefully when the sedan arrived. The camera for level P4 was old and the quality was poor, grainy black and white that made everything look washed out. I could see the car pull into space P427, see the brake lights glow red, see the exhaust vapor in the cold air, but I couldn't see clearly inside the vehicle. The windows seemed tinted, or maybe it was just the poor lighting and camera resolution making it impossible to distinguish details. One night, about a month into my job, I decided to go down to P4 and approach the car directly. I wanted to see who this person was, maybe just make sure they were okay and didn't need help. I took the elevator down, stepping out into the cold, echoing space of level P4 at 2:55 a.m. The sedan was there in P427, engine running, headlights off, brake lights casting a red glow on the concrete wall. I walked toward it slowly, my footsteps loud in the empty garage. As I got closer, I called out, "Hey, everything okay?" No response. The windows were indeed tinted, darker than legal limits probably, and I couldn't see inside at all. I knocked on the driver's side window. "Excuse me, I'm the garage attendant. Just checking if you need any assistance." Nothing. No movement inside the car, no window rolling down, no acknowledgement that anyone had heard me. But the engine kept running, and I could feel the vibration of it through the ground. I tried the door handle. Locked. I walked around the car, looking in all the windows, trying to see anything inside. The tinting was so dark it was like looking into a void. I was standing by the trunk when the car suddenly shifted into reverse. I jumped back as it backed out of the space smoothly, then shifted into drive and headed toward the exit ramp. I watched it disappear up the ramp, my heart pounding. The car had moved while I was standing right next to it, and I hadn't seen anyone in the driver's seat, hadn't seen any movement at all. I went back to my booth and pulled up the footage from the camera. I rewound to when I'd approached the car, watched myself walk up to it, knock on the window, walk around it. and then I zoomed in on the driver's side window as much as the camera would allow. The image was grainy and pixelated, but I could make out the interior of the car through the windshield reflection. The driver's seat was empty. No one was in the car, but I'd watched it drive away. I convinced myself the camera angle was wrong or the resolution was too poor to show the driver. Or maybe they were slumped down in the seat in a way that made them invisible from that angle. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I'd been standing right next to that car, looking directly at the driver's seat from multiple angles, and there had been no one inside. I started documenting everything. Every night when the sedan arrived, I'd note the exact time, watch it on camera, and record the footage to an external drive. I zoomed in from every angle the camera allowed, trying to catch any glimpse of a driver. I saved 17 nights of footage, and in every single frame, the driver's seat appeared empty. I tried researching the license plate number, but it didn't show up in any system I had access to. I mentioned it to my supervisor during a shift change, describing the car and its weird pattern. He looked at me strangely and said, "The Silver Accord? That's been happening for years. Previous attendants have mentioned it. We don't know what it is. Just leave it alone." That response chilled me more than anything else. This had been happening for years. Multiple people had noticed it, documented it, been disturbed by it. And the building management's response was to ignore it and tell employees not to investigate. But I couldn't leave it alone. I started arriving early for my shifts and staying late, watching for the sedan during times outside my normal schedule. It only appeared during the overnight hours, always between 2:45 and 2:50 a.m. I checked the entrance logs. The automated system recorded the sedan entering and exiting, but the payment information was corrupted, just a string of error codes. It had been like that for over 3 years, according to the system records. About 6 weeks ago, I decided to try something different. When the sedan arrived at 2:47 a.m., I immediately got in my own car and positioned it to block the exit ramp. If the sedan wanted to leave, it would have to get past me, and maybe I could finally see who was driving it, make them roll down a window, something. I watched on my phone, streaming the security camera feed as the 17 minutes ticked by. The sedan sat in P427, engine running, brake lights glowing. At exactly the 17-minute mark, it backed out of the space and drove toward the exit ramp. I gripped my steering wheel, ready for confrontation. The sedan came up the ramp and stopped about 20 feet from my car, which was blocking the path. We sat there in a standoff, my headlights illuminating the Silver Accord, its engine idling. I couldn't see through the windshield. The glare from my headlights reflected off the glass, making it impossible to see inside. After 30 seconds, my car's engine died, just shut off completely, all my lights going dark. I turned the key, trying to restart it. Nothing. The battery was dead. Impossible as that was, since I'd replaced it a month ago. The sedan drove around my car, using the narrow space along the wall, and continued up the ramp. By the time I got my car started again 2 minutes later, the sedan was gone. I went back to my booth and checked the footage. When the sedan had been facing my car, I could see my headlights illuminating its windshield clearly. I zoomed in as far as the camera would allow and enhanced the image as much as possible. The interior of the car was visible, lit by my headlights. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. The back seats were empty. The car was driving itself. I started researching autonomous vehicles, thinking maybe this was some kind of test for self-driving technology. But the sedan was too old, a model from before self-driving features were standard. And there were no visible modifications, no sensors or cameras mounted on the exterior. It was just a regular Honda Accord driving itself through an underground parking garage every night. Last week, I found something in the building's archived records, I'd become friendly with the night security guard for the office tower, and he let me access old incident reports from the building's database. I searched for anything related to Level P4 or Silver Honda Accords. I found a police report from 3 years and 2 months ago. A woman named Michelle Brennan, who worked on the 14th floor, had gone missing. Her car, a silver Honda Accord, was found abandoned in parking space P427 with the engine running and the driver's door open. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of what had happened to her. Security footage from that night showed her car entering the garage at 6:47 p.m., parking in P427, and Michelle getting out and walking to the elevator. The footage showed her returning to her car at 2:38 a.m. after working late. She got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and sat there for 19 minutes. At 2:57 a.m., she opened the door and stepped out of the car, leaving the engine running. She walked toward the back corner of the garage, away from the elevator, toward an area where the camera didn't have good coverage. She disappeared from view. She was never seen again. Her car sat in that space with the engine running until building security found it at 7 a.m. and called the police. The investigation went nowhere. Michelle Brennan had simply vanished from a locked parking garage with no explanation. Her case went cold. Her car was impounded as evidence, then eventually released to her family and presumably sold. But according to the records I found, Michelle's car had entered the garage at 6:47 p.m. on March 15th, 3 years ago. And every night since then at exactly 2:47 a.m., a silver Accord appears on the security cameras, parks in P427, and sits with the engine running for 17 minutes before driving away. The same behavior Michelle's car displayed the night she vanished, but compressed, repeating like an echo or a loop. I don't know what happened to Michelle Brennan. I don't know why her car, or something that looks like her car, keeps coming back to the place where she disappeared. But I know what I see every night on those security cameras, and I know that when I zoom in on that driver's seat, there's no one there. I've stopped going down to level P4. I've stopped trying to interact with the sedan. I just watch it on camera, document the timing, and let it complete its 17-minute vigil before it drives away to wherever it goes. My supervisor's advice was right. Leave it alone. But here's what terrifies me most. 2 nights ago, the sedan arrived at 2:47 a.m. as always, but this time, after parking in P427, the driver's door opened. I watched on the camera feed as the door swung wide, the interior light coming on. The car sat there with the door open for 17 minutes, the interior light illuminating an empty driver's seat. Then the door closed by itself, and the car drove away. Last night, the door opened again. But this time, on the grainy camera feed, I saw something in the back corner of level P4, in the area where Michelle had walked 3 years ago. A figure, dark and indistinct, standing in the shadows, watching the car. When the sedan's door closed and it drove away, the figure was gone. I don't know what's happening on level P4. I don't know if Michelle Brennan's car is somehow repeating her last movements, or if something else is using her car to communicate, or if I'm documenting some kind of residual haunting that plays out every night at the same time. But I know the pattern is changing. The door opening, the figure in the shadows. Something is escalating. I've started applying for other jobs. Anything that doesn't involve overnight shifts or parking garages or security cameras showing me things that shouldn't exist. Because I'm afraid that one night, I'm going to watch that car park in P427, watch the door open, and see something get out. Or worse, I'm afraid I'll see myself on that camera, walking down to level P4, getting into that empty silver sedan, and driving away to wherever Michelle went 3 years ago. The sedan will be here again tonight at 2:47 a.m. It comes every night. It's been coming for 3 years. And I'll be watching from my booth, documenting it, timing it, 17 minutes exactly before it drives away. But I won't go down there. I won't approach it, because I finally understand what my supervisor meant when he told me to leave it alone. Some things aren't meant to be investigated, some patterns aren't meant to be broken, and some cars should never be approached, no matter how many nights they come back, no matter how empty they appear to be. Michelle Brennan learned that 3 years ago, and I'm not going to make the same mistake she did. Story 6. I was never alone in the building. I still check over my shoulder constantly, even though I haven't worked that job in 4 months. Because I know what it feels like to be followed, to have someone learn your patterns so completely that they can anticipate your movements before you make them. And I know that for 6 solid weeks, someone was in that building with me every night, walking the floors above me, matching my security rounds so perfectly that I never saw them but always heard them. Footsteps echoing exactly where I would be on my next circuit. I worked as a night security guard for Meridian Corporate Center, a 15-floor office building in a suburban business park. The job was straightforward: arrive at 10 p.m., relieve the evening guard, and conduct security rounds every 2 hours until 6 a.m. when the day shift arrived. Each round involved walking all 15 floors, checking that doors were locked, windows were secure, lights were off in empty areas, and everything looked normal. Between rounds, I'd sit at the main security desk in the lobby, monitor the camera feeds, and do whatever I wanted to pass the time. The building was completely empty at night. All the businesses were typical office operations, accounting firms, insurance companies, tech startups, the kind of places where everyone went home by 6 p.m. The cleaning crew came through between 7 and 9 p.m., and then it was just me from 10 p.m. until morning. 15 floors of dark cubicles, silent conference rooms, and locked executive offices. My rounds followed a specific pattern. I'd take the elevator to the 15th floor and work my way down, checking each floor systematically. I'd test the stairwell doors, walk through the main office areas, check the bathrooms and break rooms, make sure everything was secure. Each floor took about 5 minutes, so a complete round was roughly 75 minutes. I'd do rounds at midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and sometimes a quick final one at 5:30 a.m. before shift change. The building had security cameras in the lobby, elevators, stairwells, and main entrances, but not in the actual office spaces. Budget limitations, the building manager had explained during my training. The tenants were responsible for their own internal security. My job was just to make sure the building itself was secure and catch any obvious problems. For the first 4 months, the job was exactly as boring as I'd expected. I'd do my rounds, sit at the desk reading or watching shows on my laptop, and count down the hours until I could go home. I saw the same empty floors every night, heard the same ambient sounds of the HVAC system and the building settling, encountered nothing unusual. It was mid-February when I started noticing things out of place. Small things, easy to dismiss individually. During my midnight round on the 8th floor, I found a coffee cup on one of the desks in the main cubicle area. It was still warm, the coffee inside only half finished. I knew the cleaning crew had come through hours ago, and I'd done my 10 p.m. walkthrough without seeing it. Someone had made coffee between 10 p.m. and midnight. I checked the sign-in logs at the security desk. No one had entered the building after 9 p.m. except me. I reviewed the elevator camera footage. Only I had used the elevators all night. The stairwell cameras showed nothing. I convinced myself I'd somehow missed the cup during my earlier round, that it had been there all along and I hadn't noticed. 2 nights later, I found a computer still on in a cubicle on the 11th floor during my 2 a.m. round. The monitor was dimmed but active, showing a spreadsheet that hadn't been there during my midnight check. I knew this because I'd walked past this specific desk and noticed the monitor was off. I'd even made a mental note because the cubicle had photos of 2 golden retrievers and it had made me think about getting a dog. Now the monitor was on, the spreadsheet open showing recent activity. The last cell modification timestamp was 1:47 a.m. 15 minutes before I'd arrived on this floor. Someone had been working on this computer less than 20 minutes ago. I checked the security logs again. No entry records except mine. The elevator footage showed only my trips up and down. I started paying much closer attention during my rounds. I began taking photos of each floor with my phone at the start of my shift, documenting the state of things so I could compare later. And that's when the pattern became undeniable. Things were changing between my rounds, not dramatic changes, but small alterations that proved someone was there. A chair would be moved from behind a desk to face the window. A break room light would be on when I knew it had been off. A conference room door would be closed when it had been open. Papers on a desk would be rearranged. And most disturbing, I started finding evidence that someone was using the facilities. Water droplets in a bathroom sink that had been dry an hour earlier. A soap dispenser that was fuller than it should be, like someone had refilled it. A toilet that had been flushed recently, the tank still refilling when I entered. I reported all of this to my supervisor, a man named Gerald who managed security for several buildings in the business park. He reviewed the camera footage with me, checked the logs, and found nothing. No unauthorized entries, no one on the cameras except me. He suggested maybe I was forgetting things, confusing which round I'd seen what on, or perhaps the building maintenance had access I wasn't aware of. But I knew I wasn't confused. Someone was in the building with me, and they were being very careful to avoid the cameras. The elevators and stairwells were monitored, but the actual office floors weren't. Someone could move around the building freely as long as they avoided those specific areas. I started experimenting. During my midnight round, I'd deliberately leave markers on certain floors. A pen placed on a specific desk, a piece of paper positioned carefully, a chair turned at an angle. When I'd return at 2 a.m., the markers would be moved or gone. Someone was following behind me or ahead of me, interacting with the same spaces I was monitoring. Then the footsteps started. It was during my 4th month on the job, early March, during my 2 a.m. round. I was on the 7th floor walking through the cubicle maze when I heard footsteps directly above me. Clear, distinct sounds of someone walking across the floor upstairs. The 8th floor. The footsteps moved at a steady pace, and I realized with growing dread that they were matching my path. When I turned left, they turned left. When I stopped, they stopped. I stood completely still and listened. Silence. I took 3 steps forward. Above me, 3 footsteps. I walked quickly to the end of the aisle. The footsteps above me matched my pace exactly. Someone on the 8th floor was following my movements, walking the same pattern I was walking, staying directly above me. I ran to the stairwell and climbed to the 8th floor as fast as I could, trying to catch whoever it was. I burst through the stairwell door and looked out at the office floor. Empty. Completely silent. I walked through the entire floor, checking every cubicle, every office, every possible hiding place. Nothing. No one was there. But when I went back down to the 7th floor and continued my round, the footsteps started again on the 8th floor, matching my movements perfectly. This happened every night after that. During every round, I'd hear footsteps on the floor above me, synchronizing with my path, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. I tried being unpredictable, varying my pattern, going to floors in random order. But the footsteps always found me, always stayed 1 floor above, always matched my pace. It was like whoever it was had learned my tendencies so well that they could predict where I'd go, or maybe they were watching me somehow, tracking my position in real time. The psychological toll was devastating. Every round became an ordeal of tension and fear. I'd walk through those dark floors listening to footsteps above me, knowing someone was there but unable to ever see them or catch them. I started rushing through rounds, spending as little time on each floor as possible. My supervisor noticed my logged round times were getting shorter and questioned whether I was being thorough. I begged Gerald to install more cameras, to do a full building sweep, to take this seriously. He agreed to have the police do a walkthrough with me one night. 2 officers came at 1 a.m. and accompanied me on a round. We went floor by floor, checking everything. The officers found nothing suspicious, and that night, for the first time in weeks, there were no footsteps, no objects moved, no signs of anyone else in the building. The police concluded I was either pranking them or experiencing stress-related paranoia. They suggested I consider whether night shift work was right for me. Gerald was less diplomatic. He warned me that if I kept making unfounded claims about intruders, I'd be terminated for creating unnecessary emergency responses. So I stopped reporting it. But it kept happening. Every single night, the footsteps followed me. Objects moved between rounds. Evidence accumulated that I was sharing this building with someone. I started bringing a baseball bat on my rounds. I'd walk through those floors gripping the bat, jumping at every shadow, listening to the footsteps above me echoing my own. It was late April when everything came to a horrible clarity. I was doing my 4 a.m. round, walking through the 10th floor, when I heard something different. Not footsteps on the floor above, but a sound from the elevator, the ding of arrival. I froze. I hadn't called the elevator. It was supposed to be stationary on the 1st floor. I watched the floor indicator above the elevator doors. It was moving. 12, 13, 14, 15. It went all the way to the top floor and stopped. 30 seconds later, it started coming back down. 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. It stopped on the 10th floor where I was standing. The doors opened. The elevator was empty. I stared into it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The doors started to close. At the last second, I saw something. A wet footprint on the floor of the elevator. A single footprint, like someone had stepped in water and tracked it inside. The doors closed and the elevator went back down to the lobby. I took the stairs down, my hands shaking, and went to the security desk. I pulled up the elevator camera footage, rewinding to when it had gone to the 15th floor. The footage showed the elevator doors opening on 15, staying open for 10 seconds, then closing. No one visible getting in. But when I zoomed in on the elevator floor, I could see wet footprints appearing one by one, as if invisible feet were stepping inside. 4 footprints leading from the hallway into the elevator. I quit by email that morning, didn't even wait for shift change. I sent Gerald a message saying I was done, effective immediately, and I wouldn't be returning for any reason. He called me repeatedly, angry about abandoning my post, threatening to withhold my final paycheck. I didn't care. I was never going back to that building. 2 weeks later, Gerald called me with a different tone. The new night security guard had reported similar experiences. Objects moving, footsteps on the floors above, evidence of someone in the building. This guard had lasted 3 nights before quitting. Gerald wanted to know if I'd be willing to give a statement about what I'd experienced. I told him everything in detail. He listened quietly and then revealed something that made my blood run cold. Building maintenance had been doing routine work in the 15th floor ceiling space and found evidence that someone had been living in the crawl space above the offices. Blankets, food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a collection of photographs. Photographs of me. Dozens of photos taken from above showing me doing my security rounds from angles that could only be achieved by shooting through ceiling vents or tiles. The person had been living in the ceiling, moving through the crawl space, following my rounds from above, documenting my patterns. They could move anywhere in the building without using elevators or stairwells, simply by crawling through the spaces between floors. They'd been watching me for months, learning my routines, predicting my movements. The police investigated but never identified who it was. The photos showed only me, never the photographer. The evidence in the crawl space had no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to indicate who had been living there. The building increased security, sealed access points to the ceiling spaces, and installed motion sensors. But they never caught whoever it was. I think about it constantly, about how long they'd been there before I started noticing things, about what they were planning, about the fact that they photographed me night after night from hidden positions and I never knew, about those footsteps above me, always matching my pace, always one floor up because they weren't on the floor above, they were in the ceiling directly over my head. I work in retail now, daylight hours, surrounded by people and security and cameras everywhere. I'll never work a night shift again. I'll never work alone in a building again, because I know what it feels like to be watched from the darkness, to be studied and documented and followed by someone you can't see. I know what it feels like to realize you were never alone, that every night you spent in what you thought was an empty building, someone was there, watching, learning, waiting. They never caught the person who lived in those ceilings. For all I know, they found another building, another solitary night worker to observe. And sometimes I wake up at 2 a.m. and lie very still, listening to the sounds of my apartment, wondering if I hear footsteps above me, wondering if they followed me home, wondering if I'll ever really feel safe again. To this day, I can't walk through office buildings without looking up at the ceiling tiles, checking for gaps, listening for sounds of movement above me. Because I learned that the scariest threats aren't the ones that come through doors. They're the ones that live in the spaces we forget exist, the gaps between floors, watching and waiting and learning everything about us while we have no idea they're there. Story 7. The 3 a.m. phone calls. The voice on the phone said, "I know where you park," and I felt every muscle in my body lock up because I was staring at the security camera feed on my screen, watching a figure standing in the parking garage next to my car, phone pressed to their ear, looking directly at the camera. They'd been watching me for 6 weeks, learning my routines, and tonight they'd finally decided to let me know. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour call center for Horizon Credit Services, handling customer service calls for credit card holders across multiple time zones. The shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the work was mind-numbing but steady. Answer calls, verify account information, help with billing questions, process payments, transfer to supervisors when needed. I'd been doing it for 7 months and could handle most situations on autopilot. The call center occupied the 4th floor of a business complex with about 30 cubicles arranged in rows. During overnight hours, there were usually 8 to 10 agents working, each of us isolated in our cubicles with headsets on, taking calls in our own little worlds. Management sat in a separate office area, usually just one supervisor on duty during nights. The building was quiet, fluorescent lights humming. The only sounds were the murmur of agents talking to customers and the clicking of keyboards. The weird calls started during my 4th month. It was a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning at exactly 3 a.m. I was between calls, updating notes from my previous customer when a new call came through. I answered with my standard greeting. "Thank you for calling Horizon Credit Services. This is Taylor speaking. How can I help you today?" Silence. Not dead air, but someone on the line. I could hear breathing, steady and calm. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked. The breathing continued. I waited about 30 seconds, then said, "I'm going to have to disconnect if there's no response." More breathing. And underneath it, faintly, I heard a sound, typing. Someone was typing while breathing into the phone. I disconnected the call and marked it as a wrong number in the system. Strange calls happened occasionally, pranks or people who dialed by accident. I didn't think much about it. My next call was a straightforward billing question, and I forgot about the breathing caller. But the next night at exactly 3 a.m. it happened again. Same pattern. I answered, silence, breathing, and the sound of typing underneath. This time I stayed on longer, listening, trying to figure out what they were doing. The typing continued, steady rhythmic keystrokes like someone entering data. After 2 minutes, the line disconnected from their end. This became a nightly occurrence. Every single night at 3 a.m. I'd receive a call. Same silence, same breathing, same typing sounds. I reported it to my supervisor, a woman named Deandra, after the 5th night. She checked the incoming number in the system, but it showed as blocked caller ID. She suggested I just disconnect immediately when I heard the breathing and not engage. But I was curious and increasingly unnerved. Why 3 a.m. exactly? Why the typing? Why call a credit card customer service line just to breathe and type? I started documenting the calls, timing how long they'd last before disconnecting. The caller stayed on for between 2 and 4 minutes each time, always typing, never speaking. On the 8th night, I tried something different. When the call came in at 3 a.m. and I heard the breathing, I stayed silent too. I didn't greet them or ask questions, just listened. The breathing continued. The typing continued. And then, very faintly, I heard something else, an announcement over a PA system in the background. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone and cadence were distinctive. It sounded like the PA system in our building, the one that made announcements about security alerts or emergency procedures. A chill went through me. Was the caller in this building? I looked around my cubicle area. I could see 3 other agents at their desks, all on calls, and the supervisor's office light was on. Nothing looked unusual. But the idea that the person calling me might be somewhere in this building made my skin crawl. After 3 weeks of these calls, the pattern changed. On the 22nd night, when the breathing caller came on at 3 a.m., they finally spoke. The voice was electronically distorted, run through some kind of voice changer that made it sound robotic and gender-neutral. "I can see you," the voice said. I spun around in my cubicle, my heart racing. "What? Who is this?" The distorted voice continued. "I'm not there. I'm watching the security camera. I've been watching you for weeks." I stood up, looking over the cubicle walls, scanning the office floor. The other agents were at their desks. Nobody was looking at me. Nothing seemed out of place. "What camera?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you watching from?" The typing sounds continued underneath the voice. "The garage camera, the one that shows level 3 where you park. I've been watching you arrive every night, watching you walk to the elevator, watching you leave at 6 a.m. I felt sick. Our building had a parking garage attached to it, 6 levels, and I parked on level 3 every night in one of the spots closest to the elevator. There were security cameras in the garage, I knew that, but they were monitored by building security, not accessible to random people. How was this caller watching garage camera feeds? "I'm going to hang up now," I said, my voice shaking. "And I'm calling the police." The distorted voice said, "You take your break at 3:15 a.m. You walk to your car alone to get something from your trunk. You do it every night, and I know where you park." The call disconnected. I sat there trembling, my hands hovering over the keyboard. They knew my break schedule. They knew I went to my car during breaks sometimes. They'd been watching me, documenting my routines. I immediately called Deandra to her office and told her everything. She looked concerned and said she'd contact building security right away. Building security reviewed their camera system and found that someone had hacked into the network 2 months earlier, gaining remote access to all the parking garage cameras. They'd been able to view live feeds and recorded footage from any internet connection. Security claimed they'd now secured the system and changed all passwords, but the breach meant someone had been watching those cameras for at least 8 weeks. The police were called and took a report, but without knowing who had hacked the system or why they were targeting me, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to vary my routines, park in different locations, and be aware of my surroundings. The detective I spoke with said it sounded like stalking behavior and I should take it seriously. I stopped taking breaks at my car. I started parking in different spots on different levels, arriving at different times when possible. I became hyper-aware of everyone around me in the parking garage, looking for anyone paying too much attention or acting suspicious. The nightly 3 a.m. calls stopped after the police got involved, and I started to relax slightly, hoping whoever it was had been scared off. But 3 weeks later, it started again. Not calls this time, something worse. I arrived for my shift at 9:45 p.m. and parked on level 5, a different area than my usual spot. When I got out of my car, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Printed text on plain white paper. I'm still watching. Different camera, same you. I took the note to security immediately. They reviewed all the garage camera footage from the past 2 hours, looking for anyone approaching my car. The cameras showed me parking and walking to the elevator. No one else appeared near my car during that time window. Whoever left the note had done it earlier before I arrived, which meant they'd predicted where I would park. Or they'd left notes on multiple cars hoping I'd find one. The police were called again. The note was taken as evidence. They increased patrols around the building and parking garage. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. No more calls, no more notes. I started to believe maybe the increased security presence had actually deterred whoever was doing this. Then I started noticing a car in the parking garage. A dark blue sedan, different make and model each week, but always parked with a view of the elevator or the entrance. I'd see it when I arrived and I'd see it when I left. Different cars, but always one position to watch. I reported this to security, but when they checked, the cars belonged to legitimate tenants in the building or visitors with valid parking passes. I became convinced I was being watched constantly. Every car in the garage was a potential threat. Every person walking near me could be the caller. I started having panic attacks before my shifts, sitting in my car for 20 minutes trying to force myself to get out and walk to the building. It was late September, 5 months after the calls started, when everything escalated. I was at my cubicle at 2:50 a.m., 10 minutes before the usual call time, when I received an email at my work address. The subject line was 3 a.m., and the message body contained a single attachment, a video file. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I did. The video was security camera footage from the parking garage showing me walking to my car during a break 2 weeks earlier. The footage followed me as I walked across the garage level, got to my car, opened the trunk, and retrieved my water bottle. Then the camera angle shifted and I realized it wasn't from a security camera. The angle was wrong, too low and too close. Someone had filmed me with their phone or a personal camera. Someone had been in the garage, physically present, hiding somewhere with a view of my car. The video was a message. I can get close to you whenever I want. I ran to Deandra's office, showed her the email. We called the police immediately, and building security pulled the footage from the night shown in the video. The official garage cameras showed me at my car, but they also showed in the far corner of the frame a figure standing in the shadow of a concrete pillar about 30 feet away. The figure was holding something at chest height, pointed toward me. A phone or camera. The police launched a more serious investigation. They examined the email metadata, tried to trace the video file, interviewed building tenants, reviewed weeks of security footage. They identified several instances where figures appeared in the parking garage during my shift hours, standing in positions where they could observe without being obvious. Different people, different nights, or possibly the same person wearing different clothing. I couldn't do it anymore. I quit that night, 5 months before I'd planned to leave for a better job. I told Deandra I wasn't coming back, that I didn't feel safe, that whoever was doing this had made it clear they could get close to me whenever they wanted. She understood and expedited my final paycheck. The police never identified who was stalking me. The email was sent through anonymous routing services. The video file had no identifying metadata. The figures in the garage footage were always too far away or too obscured to get clear identification. The case went cold, filed away as an unsolved stalking incident. I moved to a different part of the city and got a day shift job at a smaller company with assigned parking in a well-lit surface lot. I don't work overnight anymore. I don't park in garages anymore. And I'm hyper-aware of every car that seems to follow me. Every person who appears multiple times in my daily routines, every unknown number that calls my phone. Because I know what it feels like to be watched by someone who has the patience to observe for months, learning your patterns, documenting your movements, getting closer and closer while remaining invisible. I know what it feels like to realize that all those security cameras we think are keeping us safe can be turned against us, used by someone to study us, to learn when we're vulnerable. I still get anxious at 3 a.m. Even though I'm not working, even though I'm home in bed, when I see the clock hit 3 a.m., I feel that old dread wash over me. The fear that somewhere, someone is watching a screen with my image on it, typing notes about my patterns, planning when they'll make contact again. The detective told me that stalkers rarely stop on their own. They might pause if heat gets too intense, but they usually return or find a new target. I think about that often. I think about whether they gave up on me when I quit and moved, or whether they just became more patient, waiting for me to let my guard down. I've taken self-defense classes. I have security cameras at my apartment. I vary my routines obsessively. I check my car for tracking devices monthly. I'm vigilant in ways I never was before, ways I never thought I'd need to be. And I never ever ignore my instincts anymore when something feels wrong. To this day, I don't know who was calling me at 3 a.m., who hacked the garage cameras, who stood in the shadows filming me, who sent that email. I don't know if it was someone I knew or a complete stranger who fixated on me randomly. I don't know what their endgame was, what they were building toward during those months of surveillance. But I know they're out there somewhere. And I know that every parking garage security camera, every building camera, every device that's supposed to make us feel safer can be compromised by someone with the knowledge and the obsession. I know that being watched doesn't always leave obvious signs. Sometimes it's just a feeling you can't quite shake, a pattern you notice too late, a voice on the phone at 3 a.m. telling you they know where you park. Story 8. The last subway train. I'm watching the video right now, the one I found on the phone left on seat 27 of train 4117, and I can see myself in the reflection of the subway windows. But I'm not alone. I was never alone. There are dozens of faces behind me in the dark glass, and they're all looking at me with empty eyes, and I finally understand why train 4117 was always the dirtiest, why it always smelled wrong, why I felt watched every single time I cleaned it. Because I was being watched. By passengers who never left. I work as a night custodian for the Metropolitan Transit Authority, cleaning subway cars in the depot after they finish their last runs. My shift starts at midnight and I work until 8 a.m., moving from car to car with my supplies, wiping down surfaces, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, removing forgotten belongings. It's solitary work, but the pay is union scale and I don't mind the isolation. Most of the trains come in relatively clean, just needing basic maintenance and trash removal. Train 4117 was different. It always came in last, rolling into the depot around 2:30 a.m. after completing the final run of the night on the Red Line. And it was always filthy in ways that didn't make sense. Strange stains on the seats that wouldn't come clean no matter what chemicals I used. abandoned belongings in weird places, shoes without their pairs, phones with shattered screens, wallets with no identification. And the smell, a terrible odor I could never identify, like something organic rotting behind the walls. I'd been cleaning 41 and 17 for about 3 months, and every night was the same routine. It would arrive at 2:30, I'd board through the rear door, and I'd work my way forward car by car. The train had 6 cars total, and 41-117 was the designation for the lead car, but we called the entire train by that number. Each car would take me about 20 minutes to clean thoroughly, so the whole train was roughly 2 hours of work. The first time I noticed something genuinely wrong was early December. I was cleaning the 3rd car, working my way down the aisle with my trash bag when I found a phone on one of the seats. Phones get left behind constantly, so this wasn't unusual. I picked it up to take it to Lost and Found, and I noticed the screen was cracked, but the phone was still on, showing a video that was paused. I shouldn't have played it. I should have just taken it to Lost and Found like procedure required. But I was curious, so I pressed play. The video was obviously recorded on this phone. The angle showed someone filming from this same seat, aimed down the aisle of the subway car. The timestamp in the corner showed it was from earlier that night, around 11 p.m. The subway car was empty in the video, swaying slightly as the train moved, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The video played for about 30 seconds, showing nothing but the empty car, and I was about to stop it when I saw movement. A shadow passed across the far end of the car, quick and low to the ground. Then another shadow, this one moving along the ceiling. The camera shifted slightly, like the person filming had adjusted their grip, and I realized whoever recorded this had seen these shadows and was trying to capture them. The video continued for another minute, showing more shadows moving through the car in ways that didn't correspond to the lights or the train's movement. Then the video cut to black. I checked the phone's photo library and found it was filled with similar videos, all recorded on train 4117 over multiple nights, all showing these strange shadows moving through empty cars. I took the phone to Lost and Found, logged it, and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't stop thinking about those videos. That night when I cleaned 4117, I kept looking around nervously, checking the corners and ceiling, seeing shadows everywhere, even though I knew it was just my imagination running wild. 2 weeks later, I found another phone. This one was on seat 27 in the 4th car, lying face up like someone had deliberately placed it there. The screen wasn't cracked and the phone was recording. The little red record indicator was active, showing it had been filming for 4 hours and 36 minutes. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I stopped the recording and opened the video file. 4.5 hours of footage, the timestamp starting at 10:13 p.m. that same night. I scrolled to the end and pressed play. The video showed exactly where I was standing now, the 4th car of train 4117, the same seat, the same angle. And it showed me entering the frame about 10 seconds ago, picking up the phone, looking at it with confusion on my face. Someone had left this phone recording and they'd positioned it to capture me finding it. But who? I rewound the video, scrolling backward through the footage. At 2:25 a.m., the video showed the subway car pulling into the depot, empty and still. Before that, it showed the final minutes of the last run, a few passengers sitting scattered throughout the car, all of them getting off at the terminal station. I kept scrolling backward, watching the night's journey in reverse. Passengers getting on and off, the car filling and emptying, the eternal cycle of the subway. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In every single reflection, the dark windows, the metal poles, the glass partition between cars, there were more people than should be there. The video would show 5 passengers sitting in the car, but the reflection in the window behind them showed a dozen people standing, crowding the aisle, pressed against the glass. When those 5 passengers would exit and the car was empty, the reflections still showed figures, dozens of them filling every available space. I scrolled forward, watching more carefully. At every stop, passengers would board and sit down, completely unaware that the reflection showed the car was packed with standing figures, all of them impossibly thin, with faces that were too long and eyes that were completely black. The real passengers never seemed to notice. They'd sit reading their phones or sleeping or staring into space while the reflection showed these figures pressing close around them, faces inches away, observing them. And then I got to the part of the video that nearly made me drop the phone. At 1:47 a.m., the last passenger exited at the terminal station. The car was empty. The video continued recording as the train sat idle for 10 minutes, waiting for the signal to proceed to the depot. During those 10 minutes, the reflection showed the figures moving around the empty car, walking the aisles, sitting in the seats, congregating around specific spots like they were investigating something. At 2:15 a.m., one of the figures in the reflection turned and looked directly at the camera. Directly at the phone. Its face filled the reflection in the window behind where the phone was positioned, and it smiled. Its mouth opened far too wide, revealing rows of teeth, and it reached toward the glass as if it could reach through the reflection. I shut off the video, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Reflections don't show different things than reality shows. It was a hoax, some kind of editing trick or augmented reality filter. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling into my chest. I looked around the subway car I was standing in, looked at the windows with their dark reflections showing the interior of the car and my own face staring back. Just my reflection. Nothing else. Normal. I took the phone to my supervisor the next day and showed him the video. He watched it with increasing skepticism, then laughed and said it was obviously fake, probably one of those creepypasta horror videos people made for views. He told me to log it in lost and found and forget about it. But I couldn't forget. That night when I boarded train 4117 to clean it, I was terrified. I forced myself to work quickly, not looking at the windows, not checking reflections, just cleaning mechanically and trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. The train felt wrong, the air thick and cold, that terrible smell even stronger than usual. I was in the 5th car, almost done with my work, when all the lights went out. Complete darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart hammering, and turned it on. The beam swept across the empty car, illuminating seats and poles and trash on the floor. Everything normal. I called out, "Hello? Maintenance?" Thinking maybe someone was working on the electrical system. No response. The lights flickered and came back on. And in that instant when they came on, before my eyes adjusted, I saw them in my peripheral vision. Figures standing throughout the car, packed in tight, all impossibly thin with those 2 long faces. But when I turned my head to look directly, there was nothing. Just empty car. I ran. I grabbed my supplies and got off train 4117 and didn't go back that night. I told my supervisor the next day that I felt sick and had left early. He was annoyed but didn't push it. He assigned train 4117 to a different custodian for the next few nights while I worked other trains. 4 days later, that custodian didn't show up for work. And the day after that, he called in and quit, refusing to give a reason. My supervisor was frustrated and assigned 4117 back to me. "Whatever's going on with that train, fix it, or we're pulling it from service for a full maintenance inspection," he said. That night, I approached train 4117 with every light I owned. My flashlight, a headlamp, a portable work light. I boarded and started cleaning, working as fast as I could, determined to get through it without incident. I was in the 4th car, the same car where I'd found the recording phone when I saw the phone again. Same spot, seat 27, lying face up. This phone was different, newer model, but it was also recording. The little red indicator showed it had been filming for 2 hours. I picked it up, stopped the recording, and opened the video file with trembling hands. The footage showed the car from the perspective of seat 27. I scrolled to the most recent part and watched myself entering the frame, approaching the seat, picking up the phone. The same pattern as before. But this time, I forced myself to scroll backward through the entire video. The same thing as before, the car filling and emptying with passengers throughout the night, and the reflections showing dozens of additional figures that the passengers couldn't see. But this video was clearer, newer phone with a better camera, and I could see the figures in much more detail. They were watching the passengers with intense focus, leaning close to study them, reaching toward them with fingers that had too many joints. And every time the car would empty, every time the last passenger would exit, the figures in the reflections would change. They'd move differently, more purposefully, no longer observing but searching. Searching for something they'd lost or looking for a way out, I couldn't tell which. And then I saw something that made everything click into horrible place. At 12:47 a.m. in the video, a teenage boy was sitting alone in the car, headphones in, playing with his phone. In the reflection behind him, one of the figures pressed its face against the glass, its black eyes locked on the boy. The boy suddenly shivered and pulled his jacket tighter like he felt a cold draft. He looked around nervously, and for just a moment his eyes passed over his own reflection in the window. I watched his face change, watched his eyes widen in pure terror as if he'd seen something. He jumped up and moved to a different car, practically running. They could sense the figures in the reflections even if they couldn't see them clearly. Some primal instinct warning them of a presence, a wrongness. That's why train 4117 always had so few passengers on its late runs. People avoided it without knowing why, that gut feeling of danger overriding logic. I scrolled further backward in the video, watching earlier in the evening, and I found something that changed everything. At 9:23 p.m., the car was moderately full, about 15 people spread across the seats. The video showed a transit employee entering, an older maintenance worker doing an inspection. He walked the length of the car, checking something on his tablet, and when he reached the end, he turned and looked back. And he saw them. I could tell from his reaction. He was looking at the windows, at the reflections, and his face went white. He backed toward the door, never taking his eyes off the windows, and he stumbled out of the car at the next stop. The video showed him on the platform making a phone call, gesturing frantically. I checked the date stamp on the video. This was 3 months ago, right before I'd been assigned to clean train 4117. The previous custodian must have seen something and refused to work on this train anymore, so they gave it to me, the new guy who didn't know any better. I decided right then that I was done. I was taking this evidence to my supervisor, to transit police, to anyone who would listen. Train 4117 needed to be pulled from service, investigated, maybe scrapped entirely. Something was wrong with it in ways that went beyond mechanical failure. But as I stood there in the fourth car holding that phone, I made the mistake of looking up at the windows, at my own reflection staring back at me in the dark glass. And I saw them, all of them. Dozens of figures standing behind me in the reflection, packed so tightly they were overlapping. Their impossibly thin forms, their elongated faces, their black eyes all locked on me. I watched in the reflection as one of them reached toward me, its hand passing through the barrier between reflection and reality, becoming more solid as it emerged. I felt cold fingers touch the back of my neck, felt the presence pressing close around me from all sides. I dropped the phone and ran from that car, from that train, out of the depot and into the parking lot. I didn't stop running until I was in my car with the doors locked and the engine running. I called my supervisor from the parking lot and quit over the phone, told him I wasn't going back inside, something was wrong with train 4117 and I was done. The phone I'd found, I left it in the subway car. I didn't want it. But the video haunts me because I know what it showed. I know what's living in the reflections of train 4117, what's been there for who knows how long, watching passengers, waiting for something. The transit authority pulled train 4117 from service after I quit. I heard through a former coworker that 3 other custodians refused to work on it, and when maintenance finally did a deep inspection, they found something in the walls. Human remains, old ones, dating back years. Someone had died in that train, or maybe multiple someones, and their remains had been sealed in the walls, hidden away, never properly laid to rest. The train was scrapped, cut apart, and recycled. But I still think about those figures in the reflections, all those passengers who never left, who've been riding train 4117 for years, decades maybe, trapped somehow in the space between the real and the reflected. I think about how many people rode that train, sat in those seats never knowing they were surrounded by the dead, by entities that were watching them from the other side of the glass. And I think about that moment when I saw them, when I looked at my reflection and they were all there behind me, reaching toward me, trying to pull me through to their side. I felt their cold fingers on my skin, felt the pull toward the glass like I was about to be dragged into the reflection to join them. I don't ride the subway anymore. I don't trust reflections anymore. Because I learned that what we see in mirrors and windows and polished surfaces isn't always accurate. Sometimes reflections show the truth that our eyes refuse to see, the presence of things that exist in spaces we can't normally perceive. And sometimes, if you look too long at a reflection, something looks back. I still have nightmares about train 4117, about those black eyes staring at me, about those fingers reaching through the glass, about the feeling of being watched by dozens of entities that were once human but became something else, something that couldn't leave, that stayed trapped in the reflections of a subway car riding the same route forever, watching the living and waiting for someone to join them. To this day, I avoid my own reflection when I can, and when I can't avoid it, I never look too long, because I'm terrified that one day I'll glance at a mirror and see them standing behind me again. Those figures from train 4117, still watching, still waiting, still reaching through the glass, trying to pull me back to the place where passengers go but never leave.